Hey everyone, welcome back. I've got another batch of stories for you, and we're starting with something that will make your jaw drop. Picture this: the night before your wedding, a sex tape leaks with your name on it, sent to everyone you know, your family, your friends, your co-workers, except when you actually watch it, the faces aren't even yours. Before we dive in, I just want to give a quick shout out to everyone who's been showing up, commenting, and supporting the channel. Thank you so much. Your support means more than you know. So let's dive into the first one, because when deepfake technology meets a bitter ex with too much time on his hands, the fallout doesn't just ruin a wedding, it nearly destroys two families in the process. This couple was hours away from saying their vows when everything fell apart. I was standing in the corner of the reception hall during our rehearsal dinner, half listening to my uncle tell the same story he tells at every family gathering, when my phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again, and again. I pulled it out thinking maybe the caterer had a question or someone was running late. Instead, I saw a text from my cousin Sarah that just said, "Is this real?" with a link underneath. My first thought was that it was some kind of joke, maybe a weird wedding prank or a bachelor party thing that got sent to the wrong group chat. I clicked the link without thinking much of it. The page loaded slowly, and for a second I thought maybe it was broken. Then the video started playing and my entire body went cold. It was a sex tape, explicit, graphic, and the title had my fiance's name and mine plastered across the top in bold letters like some kind of horrific announcement. My hands started shaking. I could feel my face getting hot, and this weird ringing sound started in my ears like my brain was trying to shut down and reboot at the same time. I looked around the room, suddenly paranoid that everyone could see what I was seeing, like the video was projecting onto the wall somehow. I clicked out of it immediately and opened my messages. There were already 6 more texts: my college roommate, my fiance's sister, my mum, each one with the same link, the same horrified confusion in their words. Someone had sent this to everyone, and I mean everyone: our wedding guests, our co-workers, distant relatives we hadn't spoken to in years. It was like someone had taken our entire contact list and weaponized it. My fiancée, Emma, was across the room talking to her bridesmaids, laughing at something one of them said. She had no idea yet. I felt this awful sinking dread because I knew that in about 30 seconds, her phone was going to light up the same way mine just had, and this perfect moment we'd been planning for a year was about to shatter into a million pieces. I started walking toward her, trying to figure out what I was even going to say, when I saw her face change. She pulled her phone out of her purse, looked at the screen, and her smile just disappeared. Her hand went to her mouth. One of her bridesmaids asked if she was okay, and Emma just shook her head and walked quickly toward the hallway outside the main room. I followed her. She was leaning against the wall, staring at her phone with this look of absolute horror and disbelief. When she saw me, she held up the screen and whispered, "Did you see this?" I nodded. She looked like she was about to cry, but also like she was too shocked to even process it enough to cry yet. We just stood there for a second, both of us trying to make sense of what was happening. Then her mum came storming out of the reception hall. Her face was red, her voice was shaking, and she was holding her phone like it was a weapon. She started yelling, asking what kind of sick joke this was, demanding to know if we'd done this on purpose, if this was some kind of prank or stunt. Emma tried to explain that we had no idea what was happening, that we didn't make the video, but her mom wasn't hearing it. She kept saying things like, "How could you humiliate the family like this?" And "Everyone has seen this now." And I realized she thought the video was real. She thought it was actually us. That's when I forced myself to open the link again, this time on a bigger screen. I needed to see it properly because none of this was making sense. Emma and I watched it together, and that's when we realized the faces weren't ours. They were close, disturbingly close. Whoever made this had used some kind of software to graft our faces onto other people's bodies. It was a deep fake, a really, really convincing one. Emma's mum didn't believe us at first. She kept insisting it looked exactly like us, that there was no way it wasn't real. But we zoomed in on the details, the weird blurring around the edges of the faces, the slight lag in the expressions, the way the lighting didn't quite match. It was fake, but it was good enough to fool almost everyone who saw it. My best man, Greg, came out into the hallway holding his laptop. He's a software engineer, and he'd apparently been trying to trace the link from the moment he got the text. He said the video had been uploaded to a file-sharing site less than an hour ago, sent out through a mass email blast using a burner account. Whoever did this had planned it. This wasn't some random hacker or a prank gone wrong. This was targeted. This was personal. We spent the rest of the rehearsal dinner trying to do damage control. Emma's mum was still in shock, crying in the bathroom with her sisters. My dad kept asking if we should call the police, and I kept saying yes, but I didn't know what we were even supposed to report. People were leaving early. Some of them wouldn't even look at us. My aunt pulled me aside and asked in this hushed, horrified voice if we were into that sort of thing, and I realized she still thought the video was real. I didn't even know how to respond. I just walked away. By the time everyone left, Emma and I were sitting alone in the empty reception hall, both of us staring at our phones as more and more people texted us. Some were supportive, most were confused. A few were outright cruel, accusing us of leaking it ourselves for attention or money. One distant cousin said we should be ashamed. Another asked if we were starting an OnlyFans. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Emma was the one who said it first. We can't get married tomorrow. Her voice was quiet but firm. I wanted to argue, to say we shouldn't let whoever did this win, but I knew she was right. Half our guests had just seen a fake sex tape with our names on it. Her mum was barely speaking to her. My parents were mortified. There was no way we could stand up in front of everyone and pretend this hadn't happened. We postponed. We called the venue, the photographer, the DJ. We sent out a mass message to everyone explaining that the wedding was being moved to a later date due to unforeseen circumstances. We didn't say why. Most people already knew. The next morning, we hired a lawyer. He specialized in cybercrimes and said this kind of thing was becoming more common, but it was still hard to prosecute because the technology was so new. He told us to save everything, every message, every link, every hateful comment. We filed a police report. They took it seriously, but they also told us it could take weeks or even months to track down who did it. It didn't take that long. 3 days later, the police called. They traced the IP address to someone we knew. Emma's ex-boyfriend, Tyler, the guy she dated for 2 years before we met. The guy who'd sent her dozens of texts after we got engaged, begging her to reconsider, saying I wasn't good enough for her, that she was making a mistake. Emma had blocked him months ago, but apparently that hadn't stopped him. Tyler worked in tech. He had access to AI software, video editing tools, all of it. The police found our engagement photos saved on his computer, the same ones he'd used as source material for the deepfake. He'd spent weeks making it, refining it, making sure it looked real enough to destroy us. And then he'd sent it to everyone we knew the night before our wedding, just to twist the knife. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for what happens next. So where were we? Right, the police had just arrested the ex, but the real fallout was only beginning. Tyler was arrested for harassment, distribution of fabricated explicit content, and a few other charges the lawyer rattled off that I didn't fully understand, but sounded serious. He tried to claim it was a joke, that he didn't think people would actually believe it, but the evidence was overwhelming. The cops found drafts of the video on his hard drive, search history about how to make deepfakes more realistic, even messages to a friend where he bragged about ruining Emma's big day. We thought that would be the end of it. We thought once people found out the video was fake and that Tyler had been arrested, everything would go back to normal. We were wrong. The damage was already done. Emma's mum barely spoke to her for weeks. She kept saying things like, even if it wasn't real, people still saw it, and I don't know how we're supposed to face the family after this. Some of our wedding guests never responded when we sent out new invitations 6 months later. A few distant relatives unfriended us on social media. One of Emma's co-workers made a joke about it at the office, and she had to report him to HR. We did eventually get married. It was smaller, quieter, more intimate than we'd originally planned. And honestly, in some ways, it was better. The people who showed up were the ones who actually mattered, the ones who believed us, who stood by us even when things got ugly. But there's still this shadow over it, this feeling that something was taken from us that we'll never get back. Tyler ended up pleading guilty. He got a reduced sentence in exchange for the plea, some combination of probation, community service, and mandatory therapy. No jail time, which felt like a slap in the face, but our lawyer said it was the best we were going to get. Emma didn't even want to go to the sentencing. She said she didn't want to see his face ever again. The worst part is that the video's still out there. We got it taken down from the original site, but people had already downloaded it, shared it, reposted it. Every few months, someone new stumbles across it and sends it to us, thinking they're helping or warning us or whatever. We've stopped responding. There's nothing left to say. People ask us sometimes if we regret going through with the wedding, if we wish we'd just eloped or done something private from the start. Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wishes we'd never had to deal with any of this, but the other part of me is glad we didn't let him win completely. He wanted to destroy us. He wanted to humiliate us so badly that we'd call it off, that we'd break up, that Emma would come crawling back to him or something. And we didn't. We're still here. We're still married, and he's the one who ended up with a criminal record and a restraining order. So yeah, that's the story of how a deepfake sex tape almost ruined our wedding. If someone ever tells you technology can't hurt you, show them this, because it can, and it does, and the scars it leaves don't always heal. Just when you think technology can't get any more twisted, wait until you hear what happened when a simple PowerPoint presentation exposed an affair to an entire company. I work in sales for a mid-sized tech company. Nothing glamorous, just the kind of place where quarterly earnings calls are treated like the Super Bowl and everyone pretends to care about synergy. We'd been prepping for this one for weeks. 800 employees were going to be on the call, plus some investors, plus a few board members who only show up when they think something might go wrong. My boss, the VP of sales, was presenting our numbers, and he'd been rehearsing his slides for days like his life depended on it. He was one of those guys who loved the sound of his own voice, the type who'd interrupt you mid-sentence to tell you how he would have done it better, confident to the point of arrogance. So when the call started, he was in his element, smiling at the camera, cracking jokes, acting like he owned the room. The first two slides went fine. Revenue projections, market growth, all the usual corporate jargon that makes you want to take a nap. Then he clicked to slide 3. I was half listening, scrolling through my email on my second monitor, when I heard the chat notifications start going absolutely insane. I looked up and my stomach dropped. On the screen, in full high-definition glory, was a screenshot of text messages, explicit text messages, between my boss and someone saved in his phone as L. The texts were graphic, like the kind of thing you'd immediately regret sending sober. There were photos too, not fully visible, but cropped just enough that you knew exactly what they were. And at the top of the screenshot, clear as day, was the contact name with a little heart emoji next to it. He didn't notice right away. He was still reading from his notes, talking about customer acquisition costs or something, completely oblivious. But the chat was on fire. People were typing in all caps. Someone wrote, "Is anyone else seeing this?" Another person said, "Oh my God." I watched as more and more people started unmuting themselves, trying to interrupt him, but he just kept talking. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, and you can't look away even though you know it's going to be bad. Then someone in the comments typed, "That's the CEO's wife." I felt my blood go cold. I looked closer at the screenshot, at the name, and yeah, the contact was listed as L. But everyone knew the CEO's wife's name was Linda. This wasn't just an affair. This was a company-ending, career-destroying, stock price tanking level of disaster. And it was happening live, in front of 800 people, with the recording running. By the time my boss finally looked up at the monitor, his face went from confident to ghost white in about half a second. He froze, his mouth was open but no sound came out. Then he stammered something like, technical difficulty, and frantically started clicking to close the window, but it was too late. Someone had already screen recorded it. I saw people in the chat saying they were forwarding it to friends. One person said they'd already posted it on Twitter. The whole thing had been live for maybe 30 seconds, but that was all it took. He finally managed to close the slide deck and mumble something about needing to reschedule, then ended the call. The silence afterward was deafening. I just sat there staring at my screen, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. Within minutes, Slack was blowing up. People were sending the screen recording to each other. Someone made a meme. It sent out a frantic message saying they were working to scrub the video from the system, but it was pointless. It was already out there, spreading like wildfire across Twitter, LinkedIn, even TikTok. And here's where it gets absurd. Turns out my boss had been working on two separate PowerPoint files. One was the earnings presentation. The other was what he called a confession slideshow. He'd apparently been preparing to show the CEO privately, like some kind of unhinged apology tour. He'd been planning to come clean about the affair, maybe thinking he could control the narrative or beg for mercy or something. But he'd accidentally merged the two decks together the night before and didn't realize it until slide 3 went live in front of the entire company. The fallout was immediate and brutal. HR launched an investigation within the hour. My boss was placed on administrative leave before lunch. The CEO's wife, who also worked for the company in a consulting role, was let go by the end of the day. The CEO himself didn't show up to work for the rest of the week. Rumor was he'd filed for divorce within 48 hours, and honestly, I don't blame him. The optics alone were a nightmare, but the betrayal from his own VP and his wife? That's the kind of thing that breaks people. Then came the breaking point. The video went viral outside the company. Like, actual viral. Tech blogs picked it up. Business news outlets were reporting on it. Our stock dropped 6% in 2 days. Investors were furious. The board held an emergency meeting. My boss was officially terminated, along with the CEO's wife, and both of them had to sign NDAs, so aggressive they probably can't even say the company name out loud anymore. The CEO stayed on, but you could tell he was shattered. He used to be this larger-than-life guy, always walking around glad-handing people and talking about vision. After that, he barely made eye contact with anyone. The weirdest part is how it changed the entire office culture. People stopped using the main conference room where the call had been hosted, like it was cursed or something. It had to disable the screen sharing feature for a week because people kept making jokes about checking their slides before meetings, and everyone started being way more paranoid about what they kept on their work laptops. You'd see people closing windows the second someone walked by their desk, even if they were just looking at spreadsheets. I still work there, mostly because the job market is brutal and I've got bills to pay, but it's not the same. There's this lingering awkwardness, like we all witnessed something we weren't supposed to see, and now we can't unsee it. New hires get filled in on the story within their first week, usually by someone in a hushed voice near the coffee machine. It's become company law, the kind of thing people will be talking about for years, and honestly, the whole thing could have been avoided if he'd just double-checked his file before going live. One quick review, one moment of paying attention, and none of this would have happened. But that's the thing about arrogance. It makes you sloppy. He thought he was untouchable, that he could juggle an affair with the CEO's wife and his career at the same time, and it all came crashing down in the most public, humiliating way possible. They basically dug their own grave and tripped into it, and 800 people watched it happen in real time. Speaking of people getting exposed in the worst ways possible, imagine finding out your coworker has been collecting everyone's darkest secrets and storing them on a hard drive. I was running late to set up my presentation in the main conference room, already mentally rehearsing my talking points and trying not to spiral about whether the VP would actually show up or send his assistant like he did last time. When I walked in, the room was empty, chairs still pushed in from whatever meeting had just wrapped up, and the projector was still warm. I plugged in my laptop, pulled up my slides, and that's when I noticed it. An external hard drive, just sitting there, plugged into the HDMI adapter on the table, like someone had forgotten it existed. Now, normally I would have just unplugged it, dropped it off at the front desk, maybe sent a quick Slack message to facilities. That's the decent thing to do, but the thing is, this hard drive had a label on it, a small, neat label printed on one of those old-school label makers, and it said one word, my manager's last name, just his last name, nothing else. And I don't know what it was, maybe curiosity, maybe the fact that he'd been weirdly cagey during our last one-on-one. But I hesitated. I stared at that drive for a solid 10 seconds, my hand hovering over the USB port, and then I did something I'm still not sure I regret. I opened it. The folder structure loaded, and at first it looked normal. Reports, budget files, a folder labeled Q3 reviews, standard stuff. But then I saw the subfolder. It was just called Personnel, and inside that folder were individual files, dozens of them, each one named after someone in our department. I recognized every single name, and next to some of those names were tags, short, brutal tags. My stomach dropped when I read the first few. Jessica, DUI 2019, Marco, fake degree, Sam, affair evidence. I sat down. I actually had to sit down because my legs just stopped working for a second. This wasn't some accidental mix-up. This wasn't a forgotten thumb drive full of spreadsheets. This was Adang An, a deliberately maintained archive of everyone's worst moments. I clicked on Jessica's file first. Inside were screenshots, text messages between her and someone I didn't recognize, time-stamped from 3 years ago. A police report scanned and saved as a PDF. Photos of her car after what I'm guessing was the accident. She'd told people she had to take a few weeks off for a family emergency back then. I remembered because she came back looking exhausted and wouldn't talk about it. Turns out it wasn't a family emergency. It was a DUI arrest, and my manager had known the whole time. I felt sick, but I kept going. Marco's file had a scanned copy of his resume, the one he'd submitted when he applied here, and next to it was a Word document that appeared to be notes from a background check my manager had run independently. The degree Marco claimed to have from a university in Boston didn't exist. The school had no record of him ever attending. My manager had documented every inconsistency, saved emails where Marco mentioned his alma mater, even screenshots of LinkedIn endorsements. He had everything. Sam's folder was worse, audio files. I plugged in my headphones and played one. It was a phone call, recorded without Sam's knowledge, where he admitted to his brother that he was seeing someone from work, while his wife thought he was traveling for conferences. The recording was from 18 months ago. There were at least a dozen more files in that folder. Some were just saved voicemails, others were videos, pulled from what looked like security camera footage in the parking garage, showing Sam and the other woman getting into the same car after hours. I had to stop. My hands were actually shaking at this point, and I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. This wasn't just unethical. This was surveillance. This was blackmail material, stored and catalogued like some kind of twisted insurance policy. I scrolled through the rest of the folder. There were files for almost everyone in the department. Some were small, just a single document or a screenshot. Others were massive gigabytes of saved conversations and records. And the thing that made my blood run cold was how organized it all was. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't something he'd thrown together in a panic. He'd been building this archive for years. Some of the files had dates going back 5-6 years. He'd been systematically gathering dirt on every person who worked under him, just in case he ever needed leverage. And judging by the notes he'd left in some of the folders, he had used it. There were reminders to himself. Mentioned Jessica's incident during her review, she backed off on the complaint. Told Marco I knew about the degree, he stopped pushing for the promotion. It was all right there, a manual for manipulation. I didn't even think. I just copied the entire drive onto my laptop. All of it. Every folder, every file. I didn't care how long it took. I sat there in that conference room for 20 minutes while the progress bar crawled across my screen. My presentation completely forgotten, just watching gigabytes of secrets transfer onto my hard drive. When it finally finished, I unplugged his drive, left it exactly where I'd found it, grabbed my laptop, and walked straight out of that building. I didn't go back to my desk. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just got in my car, drove to a coffee shop 3 blocks away, and called a lawyer. The lawyer listened to everything. I explained what I'd found, how I'd found it, and what I thought my manager had been doing with it. She told me to bring the hard drive, the copy I'd made, and meet her at her office in an hour. She also told me not to go back to work until she called me. So I didn't. I sat in that coffee shop, ordered the same latte 4 times because I didn't know what else to do with my hands, and waited. 2 hours later, she called. She said we were going to HR, but we were going together, and I wasn't going to say anything without her present. That's exactly what we did. The next morning, I walked into HR with a lawyer on one side and a USB drive full of evidence on the other. HR's reaction was immediate. I mean, they tried to stay professional, but I could see the panic in their eyes the moment they started opening files. They called in the head of legal, then they called in the head of operations, then they told me to go home, stay home, and not speak to anyone about this until they completed an internal investigation. I was put on paid leave. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing. Radio silence. I didn't know if I was about to get fired, sued, or thanked. I didn't know if my manager even knew his hard drive had been copied. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. I just sat in my apartment refreshing my email every 10 minutes like some kind of anxious zombie. Then came the breaking point. I got a call from HR asking me to come in for a meeting. When I arrived, there were 4 people in the room: HR director, legal counsel, my manager's boss, and someone from corporate I'd never seen before. They told me the investigation had confirmed everything. My manager had been secretly recording performance reviews, saving private conversations without consent, and using personal information to manipulate staff decisions for years. He'd violated company policy, state recording laws, and possibly federal wiretapping statutes. He was terminated immediately. His access was revoked. Security escorted him out that same day. But here's the part that still makes me feel weird. Half the people whose files were in that archive, they didn't thank me. They didn't feel relieved. They felt exposed. Jessica found out I'd seen her DUI record. Marco knew I'd discovered his degree was fake. Sam realized someone had listened to his recorded phone calls. And even though I'd gone to HR to protect them, to stop my manager from holding this over everyone's heads, some of them couldn't separate me from the violation. I became the person who'd seen their secrets, the person who knew. It's almost funny how perfectly it backfired. I thought I was doing the right thing, and legally, ethically, I was. But socially, professionally, it wrecked me in ways I didn't expect. People stopped talking to me in the break room. I'd walk into a conversation and it would just die. I got transferred to a different department a month later. Officially, it was for my own safety and to avoid retaliation, but I knew what it really was. They didn't trust me. They didn't know what I'd seen, what I hadn't seen, or who else I'd told. I became a ghost in my own office. But here's the thing. I would do it again, every single time, because my manager wasn't just unethical. He was dangerous. He was holding people's lives hostage to protect his own position. And if I hadn't found that hard drive, if I hadn't copied it, if I hadn't gone to HR, he'd still be doing it. Jessica would still be walking on eggshells every review cycle. Marco would still be too terrified to ask for a raise. Sam's marriage might have imploded the moment my manager decided that audio file was worth more than someone's family. So, yeah, I lost friends. I lost trust. I got shuffled off to a department where nobody knew my name, and I had to start over from scratch. But I also stopped a man who spent half a decade building a blackmail archive from hurting anyone else. And honestly, I sleep better now than I did before I opened that folder. Workplace sabotage is one thing, but what happens when a coworker doesn't just spy on you? They try to destroy your entire career with lies. Rachel had been making my life miserable for about 6 months before things finally came to a head. We worked in account management at a marketing firm, and when our boss announced she was stepping down, there were really only 2 people in the running for her position. Me and Rachel. On paper, we were pretty evenly matched, same tenure, similar client lists, both hit our targets consistently. But Rachel had this way of making everything feel like a competition, even things that had nothing to do with work. She'd casually mention her wins in meetings, throw little digs disguised as jokes, undermine my ideas just enough that it didn't seem obvious. It was exhausting. The promotion was supposed to be announced after our big pitch to a potential client, this huge retail brand that could have doubled our revenue if we landed them. I'd been leading the prep work for weeks, coordinating with design, pulling together case studies, making sure every detail was perfect. The pitch was scheduled for a Thursday morning, and on Wednesday afternoon, I went to grab the final version of the client file from our shared drive. It wasn't there. I checked every folder. I searched by file name, by date modified, by keyword. Nothing. My heart started racing because this wasn't just some random document. This was the entire pitch deck, the contracts, the pricing breakdowns, everything we needed to close the deal. I asked around the office, trying to stay calm, and that's when Rachel popped her head up from her desk and said, in this super concerned voice, "Oh no, did you lose the file? I thought you were keeping track of that." The way she said it, all sweet and worried, immediately set off alarm bells. But I didn't have time to think about it because I needed to find that file. I stayed late that night rebuilding what I could from memory and old drafts. By the time I left, it was almost midnight and I was running on fumes and panic. The next morning before the pitch, I got called into HR. My stomach dropped. They told me there had been a complaint about my handling of sensitive client information. Apparently, several emails had surfaced showing that I'd been careless with file management, sharing passwords in unsecured messages, even deleting important documents without approval. They had screenshots, timestamps, the whole thing, and Rachel had been the one to bring it to their attention. I tried to explain that none of it made sense, that I'd never sent those emails, but HR said they had to take it seriously. They suspended me pending investigation. I wasn't even allowed to attend the pitch. Rachel ended up presenting instead, using a version of the deck she claimed she'd backed up. We landed the client. She looked like a hero. I looked like I'd sabotaged my own career. I spent the next 2 days in my apartment, barely sleeping, going through every file on my laptop. Because here's the thing about me. I'm paranoid. I keep backups of everything. Multiple backups, cloud storage, external drives, email archives, the works. It's overkill, but it's saved me before, and I had a feeling it was about to save me again. I started combing through the metadata on those emails HR had shown me, the ones that supposedly proved I'd been negligent, and that's when I noticed something weird. The timestamps didn't match up. The emails were dated from weeks ago, but the metadata showed they'd been created 2 days before I got suspended. Someone had backdated them, and the only person with admin access to do that kind of thing was IT. Or someone who'd convinced IT to give them access. I dug deeper. I pulled up our company Slack logs, which I also happened to have archived because, again, paranoid. And there it was, a message from Rachel to one of the IT guys, sent about a week before all this went down. She was asking about file management protocols, specifically how to adjust file dates for audit purposes. She framed it like she was trying to help with some compliance thing, all professional and innocent. But the timing was too perfect. She'd been planning this. I printed everything. The metadata reports, the Slack messages, the original emails with their real creation dates highlighted. I made copies, put them in a folder, and waited for the next all-staff meeting. We had them every Monday morning, and Rachel was scheduled to present an update on the new client. Perfect. That's when everything unraveled. I walked into the conference room that Monday with my folder tucked under my arm, and I sat in the back like I always did. Rachel started her presentation, talking about the successful pitch, the new account, all the exciting opportunities ahead. She even thanked the team for their support during a difficult transition. I almost laughed. The VP was there, along with about 40 other people from across the company. Rachel was in the middle of a slide about projected revenue when I stood up. I didn't ask permission. I just walked to the front of the room, and the look on her face was priceless. Confusion, then panic, then this forced smile like she was trying to play it cool. I turned to the VP and said, "I need 2 minutes to share something important." He looked annoyed but nodded. I laid it all out. I explained how the client file had gone missing, how I'd been suspended based on emails that didn't exist until 2 days before my suspension, how the metadata proved they'd been fabricated. I showed the Slack messages where Rachel had asked IT for help adjusting file dates. I even pulled up the original access logs, showing that she'd logged into my account using admin credentials she shouldn't have had. Every piece of evidence clean and clear, printed and organized like the world's most damning presentation. Rachel tried to interrupt. She said it was a misunderstanding, that I was twisting things, that she was only trying to help the company, but her voice was shaking, and she kept looking at the VP like she was waiting for him to rescue her. He didn't. He just stared at the papers I'd handed him, his jaw tight, his face getting redder by the second. Then came the breaking point. One of the IT guys in the room, the same one Rachel had messaged, spoke up. He said she'd told him she needed admin access to recover a deleted file for a client emergency. He thought he was doing the right thing. He had no idea she was using it to frame me. The room went dead silent. You could hear people shifting in their seats, uncomfortable, waiting to see what would happen next. The VP asked Rachel to step outside. She tried to argue, said she deserved a chance to explain, but he cut her off. His voice was calm, but you could tell he was furious. He told her to leave the building and that HR would be in touch. She grabbed her laptop and walked out, and I swear the silence in that room was louder than anything I'd ever heard. She was officially terminated that afternoon. HR called me later to apologize, said my suspension was being lifted and my record cleared. A week later, they offered me the promotion, and Rachel's office, which had a window and was about twice the size of my old one. I moved in the next day. The whole thing still feels surreal. Like, I genuinely thought this couldn't get worse when I got suspended. But then I realized she'd been planning it for weeks, manipulating people, covering her tracks. And the only reason it didn't work was because I happened to be the kind of person who hoards evidence like a digital pack rat. They basically handed over the rope and tied the knot themselves. But corporate chaos has nothing on what happened when a CEO's resignation accidentally turned into a company-wide scandal. I was sitting at my desk on a Tuesday morning, barely awake, scrolling through emails and pretending to look busy, when the notification popped up. Company-wide message from the CEO. Subject line, moving forward. I figured it was another one of those inspirational speeches about quarterly goals or team synergy or whatever corporate buzzword was trending that week. I almost didn't open it, but then I saw people in the office starting to stand up, looking at their screens with these confused, horrified expressions, and I knew something was off. I clicked the email. The body of the message was short, professional, the kind of thing you'd expect from a CEO stepping down. He thanked everyone for their dedication, mentioned it was time for new leadership, wished the company well, all the standard fare, nothing shocking. But there was an attachment at the bottom, a PDF labeled Legal Response Draft. I remember thinking that was weird. Why would he attach a legal document to a resignation email? But curiosity got the better of me, so I clicked it. The first page was what you'd expect, some formal legalese about stepping down from his position, terms of departure, severance details. But then I scrolled to the second page and my stomach dropped. Screenshots, text messages, between the CEO and someone saved in his phone as Ashley. And these weren't work-related messages. They were explicit, inappropriate, and based on the tone, very clearly not between two equals. The timestamps showed they'd been going on for months. I kept scrolling, and it got worse. There were Venmo transactions attached as evidence, payments from the CEO to this Ashley person, labeled things like "for your help" and "thanks for last night," and horrifyingly, "keep this quiet." I felt my face get hot. This wasn't just inappropriate, this was a scandal. And it had just been sent to 1,200 people, including employees, investors, and the entire board of directors. The office erupted. People were standing up, walking over to each other's desks, pointing at their screens in disbelief. Someone in the cubicle next to me said, "Is this real?" out loud to no one in particular. I checked the sender. It was definitely the CEO's official email address. This wasn't a prank or a hack. He'd actually sent this. Within minutes, people were forwarding the email externally. I saw someone send it to a friend who worked at a competitor. Another person posted screenshots on Twitter. It sent out a frantic message saying to delete the email immediately and not forward it to anyone. But by then, it was way too late. The internet had it. News outlets had it. This was going to be everywhere. And here's where it gets absurd. Within an hour, actual journalists started reaching out to employees for comment. Business Insider published an article. Bloomberg picked it up. The company's stock started tanking in real time. I watched it drop on my phone, refreshing the page over and over like I was watching a car crash. The PR team was in full meltdown mode, sending out statements that basically said nothing, trying to do damage control on something that was already nuclear. Then the intern came forward. Her name was Ashley. She was 19 years old, and she'd been working in the marketing department for less than 6 months. She released a statement through a lawyer saying she'd been pressured into the relationship, that the CEO had used his position of power to manipulate her, and that when she tried to end things, he'd threatened her job. She said the Venmo payments were hush money, that he'd been paying her to keep quiet about the whole thing. She had texts, emails, recorded phone calls, everything, and she was filing a lawsuit. The CEO tried to do damage control. He sent another email, this time claiming his account had been hacked, that someone had fabricated the documents and sent them from his email to sabotage him. He said he was the victim of a targeted attack and that he'd be cooperating with authorities to find the person responsible. It was pathetic. Nobody believed him, especially because the legal draft he'd accidentally attached had metadata showing it was created on his personal laptop with his digital signature 2 days before he sent the email. 8 pulled the logs. It wasn't a hack. He'd just attached the wrong file, probably in a panic while trying to resign before the whole thing blew up on its own terms. But that wasn't even the worst part. The board held an emergency meeting and launched a full investigation. Turns out this wasn't an isolated incident. 3 other former interns came forward with similar stories. The CEO had a pattern. He'd been doing this for years, targeting young women who were new to the company, using his authority to coerce them, and then paying them off or threatening them into silence when things got messy. The company faced lawsuits from shareholders, claiming the board had failed in their fiduciary duty by not catching this sooner. The PR nightmare spiraled into a legal nightmare, and the company's reputation was in freefall. Things went from bad to unhinged when the CEO showed up at the office unannounced a week later, trying to collect his belongings. Security had to escort him out. Someone filmed it on their phone, and that video also went viral. He was yelling about how he'd built the company, how everyone was turning on him, how he was being unfairly targeted. It was uncomfortable to watch, like seeing someone completely detached from reality in real time. The board officially terminated him the next day and announced they were cooperating fully with law enforcement. The fallout didn't stop there. The company had to rebrand entirely. New name, new logo, new executive team. The whole 9 yards. They brought in crisis management consultants who basically said the only way to survive this was to distance the company from the CEO as much as humanly possible. They issued public apologies, set up a fund for the victims, implemented new policies around workplace conduct, and hired an entirely new HR department. It was a complete overhaul, and it still took months for things to feel remotely normal again. The CEO is now facing criminal charges, harassment, coercion, misuse of company funds, a whole laundry list of things that could land him in prison. His lawyers are trying to negotiate a plea deal, but given how public everything is, I don't think he's getting out of this easily. The intern Ashley settled her lawsuit for an undisclosed amount, but her lawyer made a statement saying she's doing okay and focusing on her recovery. The other women who came forward also settled, and the company paid out millions in damages. I still work here, which feels surreal sometimes. The new CEO is a woman in her 50s who came from outside the company, and she's been incredibly transparent about rebuilding trust. But there's still this lingering discomfort, like we all witnessed something so monumentally awful that it's hard to just move on. New hires don't know the full story unless someone tells them, and even then, it's told in hushed tones, like a cautionary tale about what happens when power goes unchecked. The craziest part is that none of this had to happen. If he'd just double-checked the attachment before hitting send, he could have resigned quietly. Maybe avoided some of the fallout, at least controlled the narrative a little. But instead, he accidentally exposed himself in the most catastrophic way possible, and it destroyed everything. His career, his reputation, the company's image, all of it gone because of one careless mistake. They handed over the rope and tied the knot themselves, and 1,200 people watched it happen in real time. If you think getting caught in a corporate scandal is bad, wait until you hear what happened when someone's promotion turned out to be completely fake. I got the email on a Friday afternoon, right as I was about to log off for the weekend. Subject line said, "Congratulations," and I almost deleted it thinking it was spam. But then I saw it was from our chief operating officer, and my heart did this weird little jump. I opened it, and there it was in bold letters at the top. "Congratulations on your promotion to senior director." I read it 3 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. There was a whole paragraph about my contributions to the company, my leadership, how excited they were to have me step into this new role. It even had my new salary listed at the bottom. I literally screamed. My partner came running into my home office thinking something was wrong, and I just held up my laptop, grinning like an idiot. We went out that night, celebrated with dinner at this place we'd been saving for a special occasion. I called my parents, texted my friends, updated my LinkedIn with the new title before I'd even finished my appetizer. I felt like I'd finally made it. Like all those years of overtime and projects that went nowhere and meetings that could have been emails had actually paid off. I went to bed that night feeling like I was on top of the world. Monday morning, I walked into the office early because I wanted to see my new space before everyone else got there. I'd been working in a cubicle for 4 years, and the email said I'd be moving to one of the corner offices on the executive floor. I took the elevator up, walked down the hall, and stood in front of the door that was supposed to be mine. Except my name wasn't on it. Someone else's name was there, already printed on one of those official-looking plaques. I stared at it for a solid minute, thinking maybe I'd gotten the office number wrong. I checked the email on my phone. Nope. Same office number, same floor, different name on the door. I went back downstairs, my stomach starting to twist into knots, and sent a message to HR asking if there'd been some kind of mix-up with the office assignments. Within 10 minutes, I got a reply asking me to come to the HR department right away. That's never a good sign. When I walked in, there were two people waiting for me. The HR manager and some guy from legal I'd never seen before. They both looked uncomfortable, like they were about to tell me my dog died or something. The HR manager started talking, and I swear I could see her rehearsing the words in her head before she said them out loud. She told me there'd been a system error. The promotion email that went out to me on Friday was meant for someone else. A placeholder file, she called it. They'd been drafting promotion announcements for several candidates, and mine got sent by mistake when someone clicked the wrong button. She said it with this apologetic smile, like she was explaining a minor inconvenience and not the fact that they'd just detonated my entire weekend. I just sat there. I didn't know what to say. I asked if the promotion was still happening, maybe just delayed or something, and she hesitated. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. The position had already been filled. Someone else got it. The email I received, the one I'd celebrated, the one I'd told everyone about, wasn't real. It was a mistake, a glitch, an accident. And here's where it gets absurd. The legal guy leaned forward and said they understood this was an unfortunate situation and they wanted to make it right. They were offering me a small raise, nothing close to what the promotion would have been, but enough to show they valued me. In exchange, I'd need to quietly step back, delete the LinkedIn post, tell people it was a misunderstanding, and not make a big deal out of it. He said it would save everyone from embarrassment, especially the company. He actually used the word embarrassment, like I was the one who should be worried about looking bad. I asked how this even happened, how a system error could send out a fully detailed promotion offer with salary figures and a personalized message. The HR manager got even more uncomfortable and said sometimes these things slip through the cracks. She wouldn't look me in the eye. I told them I needed time to think about it, and I left. I didn't go back to my desk. I went straight to my car, sat in the parking lot, and called an employment lawyer. The lawyer listened to everything, asked me to forward the email, and told me to sit tight while she looked into it. 2 days later, she called me back, and what she told me made my blood boil. This wasn't the first time this had happened. She'd done some digging, talked to a few former employees, and found out that over the past 2 years, at least 3 other people had received fake promotion emails. The company had been using them as morale boosters, dangling promotions in front of employees to keep them motivated, then pulling them back and offering smaller raises to smooth things over. It was a pattern, a deliberate one. I felt sick, not just because it happened to me, but because it had happened to other people, and the company had gotten away with it every time. My lawyer said we had a case for emotional distress and fraudulent misrepresentation. She drafted a letter outlining everything: the fake emails, the pattern of behavior, the settlement offers designed to keep people quiet. She sent it to the company's legal department with a deadline. Either they made this right or we were filing a lawsuit. Things went from bad to unhinged. The company panicked. Within 48 hours, I got a call from someone way higher up the chain than the HR manager. They wanted to settle. They offered me the senior director title for real this time, the salary that was listed in the original email, and a formal apology. They also agreed to conduct an internal review of their HR practices, which was code for "we're going to pretend to fix this so you don't sue us into oblivion." I took the deal, not because I trusted them, but because I wanted the job I'd already celebrated, the job I'd already told everyone about, and honestly, I wanted to watch them squirm. The HR director who'd sat across from me and tried to gaslight me into thinking this was no big deal, she was quietly let go a month later. They called it a restructure, but everyone knew what it really was. I moved into that corner office, the one with my name on the door this time, and I made sure to send a company-wide email thanking leadership for the promotion. I wanted everyone to know. I wanted it on record. Because the thing about fake promotions is that they only work if people stay quiet. The second you refuse to play along, the second you make noise, the whole thing falls apart. Looking back, the worst part wasn't even the fake email. It was the fact that they thought I'd just accept the raise and move on, that I'd be grateful for the crumbs they were offering to keep me from making a scene. The audacity of assuming I'd protect their reputation while they destroyed mine is honestly kind of impressive in the worst way possible. From fake promotions to real betrayals, here's a story about someone whose ex decided revenge was worth destroying a whole relationship. I thought I was over the breakup. 6 months had passed. I'd started dating someone new. I was doing okay. My ex and I had ended things relatively cleanly. Or so I thought. No screaming matches, no dramatic social media posts. Just a mutual acknowledgement that we weren't working and it was time to move on. I even wished him well when we last spoke. So when my best friend texted me asking if I was okay, I had no idea what she was talking about. She sent me screenshots, messages from our mutual group chat, the one I'd apparently been removed from without knowing. My ex had been telling people I'd cheated on him, that I'd stolen money from his apartment, that I'd faked a pregnancy to manipulate him into staying. I read those messages 3 times, my hands shaking, because none of it was true. Not a single word. I'd never cheated, never taken anything that wasn't mine, and the pregnancy thing was so absurd I almost laughed. Almost. But people were believing him. I could see the replies. Friends I'd known for years were saying things like, I always knew something was off about her, and that's so messed up. I'm sorry you went through that. I tried to defend myself. I messaged a few people privately, told them it wasn't true, that he was lying. Some of them ignored me. Others said they didn't want to get involved, that it was between me and him. One person straight up blocked me. I felt like I was losing my mind, watching my entire social circle turn against me based on stories he'd completely fabricated. And the worst part was, I had no proof. How do you prove something didn't happen? How do you prove you didn't cheat, didn't steal, didn't fake a pregnancy? It felt impossible. Then it got worse. My boss pulled me aside at work one day and asked if everything was okay at home. I was confused until she mentioned that someone had sent her an anonymous email claiming I was dealing with some personal issues that might affect my work performance. The email didn't go into detail, but it referenced the rumors. Someone, probably one of his friends, had actually contacted my employer to make me look unstable. I was humiliated. I told my boss it was all lies, that my ex was spreading false information, and she said she believed me but that I should handle it before it became a bigger problem. I left her office feeling sick. I was devastated. I spent nights crying, replaying every conversation, every interaction, trying to figure out what I'd done to deserve this. I'd moved on first, sure, but that wasn't a crime. I hadn't flaunted my new relationship. I hadn't said anything bad about him. I'd just lived my life. And for that, he'd decided to destroy my reputation. But that wasn't even the worst part. One night, about 2 weeks into this nightmare, I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling when I remembered something. We used to have a shared cloud account. We'd set it up years ago to share photos and documents, back when we were still together and thought we'd be together forever. After the breakup, I'd completely forgotten about it. I grabbed my laptop, logged in, and there it was. Our old account, still active, still shared. I started going through the files. Most of it was old stuff, photos from vacations, random documents, nothing interesting. But then I found a folder labeled Journal. I opened it. It was his personal journal, entries dating back months, some from after we'd broken up. I started reading, and my stomach turned. Entry after entry, he wrote about how angry he was that I'd moved on, how he felt humiliated that I was dating someone new while he was still single. And then, in an entry from about 3 weeks before the rumors started, he laid it all out. He wrote about planning to ruin my reputation. He said he was going to tell people I'd cheated, that I'd stolen from him, that I'd lied about being pregnant. He even wrote about how satisfying it would be to watch me lose everything. I kept digging. There were screenshots he'd saved, messages between him and his friends, where he bragged about how well his plan was working. He'd sent them updates, laughing about how people were cutting me off, how I was probably freaking out. There was even a voice memo recorded on his phone, where he talked through the whole strategy. He sounded proud of himself, casual, like he was discussing weekend plans. I copied everything, every journal entry, every screenshot, every voice memo. I saved it all to my own drive and logged out of the shared account. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from sadness. It was from anger. Pure, unfiltered rage. He'd deliberately set out to destroy me, and he'd almost succeeded. But he'd also been stupid enough to document the entire thing. And here's where it gets absurd. A few days later, I was scrolling through social media when I saw a post from one of our mutual friends congratulating my ex on his engagement. He'd gotten engaged to someone I'd never met, someone he must have started dating shortly after our breakup. Her profile was public and she looked happy, posting photos of the ring, talking about wedding plans. I felt bad for her. She had no idea who she was about to marry. I thought about it for a long time. I could have just cleared my own name, sent the proof to the people who turned on me and left it at that. But that didn't feel like enough. He tried to ruin my life because his ego couldn't handle me moving on. He deserved to face consequences beyond just losing an argument. So I sent everything to his fiancée. Not out of spite, though I won't lie and say spite wasn't part of it, but because she genuinely deserved to know. I kept the message simple. You deserve to know who you're marrying. And I attached the journal entries, the screenshots, the voice memo, all of it. She didn't respond right away. I didn't expect her to. But 3 days later, I got a message from a mutual friend. My ex's engagement was off. His fiancée had called off the wedding, and not only that, she'd confronted him publicly. She'd posted some of the proof on her own social media, tagging him, calling him out for being a liar and a manipulator. She didn't mention me specifically, but she made it clear that he'd fabricated stories about an ex to make himself look better. People started connecting the dots. The same friends who'd believed his lies were now seeing the truth. That's when everything unraveled. His fiancée went a step further. She reached out to the people he'd lied to and shared the proof with them directly. The journal entries where he admitted to making everything up. The screenshots where he bragged about it. One by one, people started apologizing to me. Some of them were genuine, saying they should have heard my side before jumping to conclusions. Others were more defensive, trying to save face. I didn't care either way. My name was cleared. That was all that mattered. My ex tried to do damage control. He claimed his account had been hacked, that someone had fabricated the journal entries to frame him. But the metadata didn't lie. The files were created on his devices, saved to his account, time-stamped over months. Nobody believed him. He deleted his social media accounts a week later. I heard through mutual friends that he'd moved to a different city, trying to start over somewhere people didn't know the story. Good riddance. The whole thing still feels surreal. I went from being isolated and humiliated to having my life back, and all because he was arrogant enough to document his own lies. He thought he was untouchable, that he could ruin me without consequence. But the thing about burning bridges is that sometimes the fire spreads back to you, and in his case, it burned everything he'd tried to build. Revenge isn't always about exposing someone privately. Sometimes it's about playing their own words in front of everyone they know. I'd been best friends with Jenna since high school. We'd been through everything together, breakups, family drama, late-night crying sessions over pizza, the whole deal. So when she started dating this guy named Marcus, I was happy for her. They seemed good together at first, but after about 8 months, things fell apart. He broke up with her, said they weren't compatible, and that was that. She was devastated, and I was there for her through all of it. Ice cream, terrible movies, letting her vent for hours about how much she hated him. Standard best friend duties. About a year later, I ran into Marcus at a mutual friend's party. We started talking, realized we had a lot in common, and eventually started dating. But before anything happened, I called Jenna. I asked if she'd be okay with it. Told her I didn't want to do anything that would hurt her or mess up our friendship. She said she was totally fine with it, that she'd moved on, that she actually thought we'd be good together. I even have the text messages where she said, and I quote, "Go for it, I'm so over him." So I did. We started dating, and for a while everything seemed normal. Then one random Tuesday afternoon, my phone started blowing up. DMs on Instagram, messages on Facebook, texts from people I hadn't talked to in years, all of them saying the same thing. Had I seen Jenna's TikTok? I opened the app and my stomach dropped. There she was, sitting in her car, crying, telling this whole story about how I'd stolen her boyfriend, betrayed her trust, and ruined her life. She said I'd gone after Marcus while they were still together, that I'd been sneaking around behind her back, that I was a terrible person who didn't care about anyone but myself. The video had over 200,000 views. The comments were brutal. People were calling me a homewrecker, a snake, a fake friend, every insult you can imagine. I tried calling her immediately. No answer. I texted her asking what the hell was going on. Nothing. She just posted this nuclear bomb of a lie and then disappeared. Meanwhile, my life was falling apart. People I worked with saw the video. Someone even sent a complaint to my boss saying they didn't feel comfortable working with someone of such low character. My boss called me in for a meeting to ask if there was any truth to it. I had to explain the whole situation, show the text messages where Jenna gave me her blessing, prove that Marcus had been single for a year before we got together. It was humiliating. The worst part was that nobody cared about the truth. The TikTok had gone viral, and once something like that is out there, it doesn't matter what actually happened. People had already decided I was the villain. I was getting hundreds of messages from strangers, some of them genuinely threatening. One person found my workplace address and said they were going to come confront me in person. I had to make my social media accounts private, and even then, people were finding ways to get to me. I spent days trying to figure out what to do. I thought about posting my own video explaining my side, but I knew it would just look defensive. I considered legal action, but my lawyer said defamation cases are expensive and hard to win, especially over social media drama. I felt completely powerless. Jenna had lied, publicly destroyed my reputation, and there was nothing I could do about it. Then I remembered something. A few months earlier, Jenna had sent me a voice note late at night. She'd been drinking, and she was rambling about how she felt like her life wasn't going anywhere, how she saw me happy with Marcus, and it made her feel jealous. She said, and I remember this clearly because it stuck with me, "I know I said I was fine with you guys dating, but honestly, I'm just jealous you're happy and I'm not. I feel like I need attention or something." At the time, I'd brushed it off as drunk emotions, told her I loved her and that she'd find someone great too. But I'd saved the voice note because I save pretty much everything. I pulled it up on my phone and listened to it again. It was perfect, clear, undeniable proof that she knew she was lying, that this was all about jealousy and wanting attention, not about me actually doing anything wrong. And conveniently, Jenna was throwing a birthday party 2 weeks later. A big one, at her apartment, with probably 50 people invited. I got the invitation in the mail before the TikTok went up, and she never uninvited me. So I decided I was going. The night of the party, I dressed up, grabbed a bottle of wine, and showed up like nothing was wrong. When I walked in, the room got quiet. People stared. A few of her friends gave me dirty looks, but I smiled, walked straight up to Jenna, and handed her the wine. I said, "Happy birthday, Jenna. Hope you have an amazing night." She looked uncomfortable, stammered out a thank you, and I could tell she wasn't expecting me to actually show up. I mingled for a bit, made small talk, waited for the right moment. About an hour in, someone turned on the speaker system to play music. That's when I made my move. I walked over to the aux cord, unplugged the phone that was connected, and plugged in mine. The music cut out. People turned to look at me. Jenna was across the room, confusion on her face, starting to walk toward me like she was about to ask what I was doing. I didn't give her the chance. I pressed play on the voice note. Jenna's drunk voice filled the room, clear as day, saying, "I know I said I was fine with you guys dating, but honestly, I'm just jealous you're happy and I'm not. I feel like I need attention or something." The room went dead silent. You could hear people shifting, looking at each other, looking at Jenna. Her face went from confused to pale in about 2 seconds. And here's where it gets absurd. She tried to play it off. She said it was taken out of context, that I was twisting her words, that this was a private conversation. But the damage was done. People had seen the TikTok. They'd heard the voice note, and now they were putting two and two together. One of her friends, someone who'd been giving me dirty looks earlier, actually said out loud, "Wait, so you lied?" Another person pulled out their phone and started pulling up the TikTok to compare what she'd said publicly versus what she'd admitted privately. Half the room walked out within 10 minutes, just grabbed their stuff and left without saying goodbye. The ones who stayed were clearly uncomfortable, whispering to each other, avoiding eye contact with Jenna. She tried to salvage it, said something about how the party wasn't over, but it was. The vibe was destroyed. I unplugged my phone, handed the aux cord back to whoever had it originally, and left without another word. That night, Jenna deleted the TikTok. The next morning, she posted a public apology saying she'd exaggerated and let her emotions get the best of her, that she was sorry for any harm caused. It was vague, didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew what it was about. The damage to my reputation didn't disappear overnight, but it started to fade. People who'd sent me hate messages reached out to apologize. My boss stopped giving me weird looks. Slowly, things went back to normal. Jenna and I haven't spoken since. Mutual friends have tried to get us to reconcile, but I'm not interested. She didn't just lie. She weaponized the internet against me, knowing full well what it would do, all because she was jealous and wanted attention. That's not something you come back from. Last I heard, she moved to a different city and deleted most of her social media. I don't know if she learned anything from it, but I know I did. Never underestimate the power of keeping receipts. If you think public humiliation is intense, let me tell you about the neighbor who learned that threatening the wrong person can land you in handcuffs. I bought my house 3 years ago in one of those quiet suburban neighborhoods where people mostly keep to themselves, and the biggest drama is usually someone's trash cans being out a day too long. My neighbor Dan lived in the house directly next to mine, and for the first few months things were fine. We'd wave when we saw each other, make small talk about the weather, normal neighbor stuff. But then I decided to plant a row of trees along our shared property line. Nothing crazy, just some evergreens to give my backyard a little more privacy. I checked the property survey, made sure they were on my side of the line, did everything by the book. I thought it was a nice addition. Dan did not agree. The first sign of trouble was a note taped to my mailbox. It was typed, not handwritten, which already felt weirdly formal and passive-aggressive. It said that my trees were blocking his view of the sunset and asked if I'd consider removing them, or at least trimming them down significantly. I ignored it. They were on my property, they weren't violating any codes, and honestly, his view of the sunset wasn't my problem. A week later, another note. This one was less polite, saying that I was being inconsiderate and that property values could suffer because of my landscaping choices. Still typed, still taped to my mailbox like some kind of anonymous complaint, even though I knew exactly who it was from. Then the note stopped and the shouting started. He'd see me outside and just launch into these rants about how I was ruining the neighborhood, how I had no respect for the community, how people like me shouldn't be allowed to own property. I mostly just walked away, but it was exhausting. I started avoiding going outside when his car was in the driveway. I'd peek through the blinds before grabbing my mail. It was ridiculous, but I didn't want to deal with another confrontation. That's when everything unraveled. One night around 11, I was getting ready for bed when someone started pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. I looked through the peephole and saw Dan standing there, swaying slightly, clearly drunk. He was yelling something about how I needed to come outside and talk to him like an adult. I didn't open the door. I told him through the door that it was late and he needed to leave. He started screaming that I was a coward, that I'd made a huge mistake moving here, that he was going to make me regret ever planting those trees. The threats were vague but aggressive enough that I genuinely felt scared. I called the police, but by the time they showed up, he'd gone back to his house. The officer took a report, said there wasn't much they could do without evidence, and suggested I get a camera. The next day, I installed a video doorbell. One of those smart ones that records everything and sends alerts to your phone. I also put up a sign saying the property was under surveillance, hoping that would be enough to make him back off. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I started to think maybe the police visit had spooked him, that he'd finally let it go. I was wrong. He came back on a Thursday night just after midnight. I was asleep when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the doorbell camera. I opened the app and watched in real time as Dan stumbled up to my door, drunk again, and started screaming. He was saying I had no right to plant those trees, that he was going to rip them out himself, that he'd make my life a living hell until I moved. Then he started kicking my door, not just once but repeatedly, like he was trying to break it down. I called the police again, and this time I had video evidence with clear audio of every threat he made. But that wasn't even the worst part. While I was reviewing the footage from the past 2 weeks, looking for any other incidents I might have missed, I noticed something else. Dan had been walking up and down the street almost every day, and in several clips he was picking up packages from neighbors' porches and carrying them back to his house. At first I thought maybe he was being helpful, collecting packages for people who weren't home. But then I saw him do it again the next day, and the day after that, always when no one was around, always looking over his shoulder before grabbing the boxes. He was stealing. I went back through all the footage, every single day since I'd installed the camera, and compiled a list. Dozens of clips, different houses, Different times of day, always the same behavior. He'd walk by casually, check to see if anyone was watching, grab the package, and head home. I saved every video, organized them by date and address, and put together a file with timestamps. Then I sent the whole thing to the police along with the footage of him threatening me and trying to kick in my door. They arrested him 2 days later, showed up at his house with a warrant for harassment, trespassing, and multiple counts of theft. Turns out several neighbors had filed reports about missing packages over the past few months, but there hadn't been any leads until my footage. And here's the kicker. When they ran his information, they found out he had an outstanding warrant for unpaid fines in another county. Something about traffic violations that had escalated because he never showed up to court. So not only was he getting charged for everything he did to me and the neighbors, but he also had to deal with the old warrant. He was sentenced to 6 months. Not a lot, but enough. The judge also issued a restraining order requiring him to stay at least 500 feet away from my property. When he got out, he put his house up for sale within a week. I guess the idea of living next to someone who'd gotten him arrested was too much for him to handle. Or maybe it was the fact that the entire neighborhood knew what he'd done. Either way, he was gone within 2 months. The day the sold sign went up, one of the neighbors organized a block party. Nothing huge, just a cookout in someone's driveway, but it felt like a collective exhale. People were laughing, kids were running around, and someone made a joke about how we should all chip in to buy me a nicer doorbell camera as a thank you. It was the first time in months I'd felt actually comfortable in my own neighborhood. The whole thing could have been avoided if he'd just let the trees go. That's what gets me. He destroyed his own life over a property line dispute that had nothing to do with him. The sheer lack of self-awareness required to escalate something that minor into criminal charges is honestly kind of baffling. But I'm not complaining. My trees are still there, growing taller every year, and I've got a much quieter neighbor now. From neighborhood nightmares to family secrets that nobody saw coming, this next one involves a funeral that revealed a sibling no one knew existed. We were standing at the graveside, my mom on one side of me, my sister on the other, all of us staring at the casket like we were waiting for some kind of closure that wasn't coming. My dad had died suddenly, heart attack in his sleep, no warning, no chance to say goodbye. The funeral had been a blur of condolences and casseroles, people telling us how sorry they were, how he was such a good man, how much he'd be missed. I was barely holding it together, just trying to get through the day without completely falling apart. The service was winding down, people starting to drift away, when I noticed someone walking toward us. A man, maybe in his early 30s, wearing a dark suit that looked like he'd just bought it. He wasn't someone I recognized, and from the way my mum tensed up next to me, she didn't know him either. He walked right up to her, his face serious but not unkind, and said, "I'm sorry for your loss. He was my father too." The world just stopped. My mum's face went completely white, like all the blood had drained out of her in an instant. My sister let out this choked sound and started crying, not the quiet tears she'd been holding back all day, but real sobbing. I just stood there, my brain trying to process what he'd just said, because it didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. My dad didn't have other kids. We would have known, right? The man, who introduced himself as David, seemed to realize he'd just dropped a bomb in the middle of a funeral. He looked genuinely apologetic, but he didn't back down. He explained, his voice low so the remaining mourners wouldn't hear, that our father had been in a relationship with his mother 35 years ago, before he'd married our mum. His mother had gotten pregnant, and even though they didn't stay together, our dad had been part of David's life, quietly, secretly, for decades. My mum couldn't speak. She just stood there shaking, tears streaming down her face, and I had to grab her arm to keep her upright. My sister was still crying, and I was trying to hold it together for both of them, but I felt like I was going to throw up. This stranger was standing in front of us, at our father's funeral, claiming to be our brother, and I had no idea if he was lying or if my entire life had just been rewritten. David must have seen the disbelief on our faces because he said he had proof, photos, letters, documents, things he could show us if we wanted to see them. My mum whispered that we needed to leave, that she couldn't do this here, not in front of everyone. So we arranged to meet David after the service, at a coffee shop a few blocks from the cemetery. I don't even remember driving there. I was on autopilot, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my mind racing through every memory I had of my dad, trying to find some hint, some clue that he'd been hiding something this massive. When we sat down with David, he pulled out a folder. Inside were photos of him as a kid, standing next to our dad at baseball games, at birthday parties, at what looked like a college graduation. Our dad looked younger in the photos, but it was definitely him. Same smile, same eyes. There were letters too, birthday cards our dad had sent every year until David turned 18. They were signed Dad, written in handwriting I recognized from every Father's Day card I'd ever received. But that wasn't even the worst part. David showed us bank statements. Our dad had been making child support payments for years, regular deposits into an account for David's mother. And there was a savings account, one our dad had set up in David's name when he was born, adding money to it every month for over 3 decades. By the time David turned 18, there was over $50,000 in it, enough to pay for college, enough to start a life. My mum was shaking. She kept saying, "I don't understand," over and over. Like if she said it enough times, it would start making sense. My sister asked David why he'd never reached out before, why he'd waited until now. He said he hadn't known our dad was gone until he saw the obituary online. He'd done one of those DNA genealogy tests a few months earlier, just out of curiosity, and it had matched him to our family tree. He'd been planning to reach out, to introduce himself, but then he saw the obituary and realized he was too late. I asked him why our dad kept it a secret. David said he didn't know. His mother had told him that our dad wanted to be involved but couldn't do it publicly, that it would hurt too many people, so they'd kept it quiet. David grew up knowing who his father was, getting birthday cards and occasional visits, but never being able to tell anyone. He said it was lonely, growing up with a dad who couldn't acknowledge him in front of the rest of the world. And here's where it gets absurd. My mum, still crying, asked David if he wanted anything from the estate. Like, she was sitting there, her entire marriage revealed as a lie, and she was worried about being fair to this stranger who'd just upended our lives. David said he didn't want to cause problems, that he just wanted to meet us, to know his siblings, but my mum insisted. She said if he was our dad's son, he deserved his share. We left the coffee shop in a daze. Over the next few weeks, my mum's lawyer got involved. They pulled our dad's will, which didn't mention David at all, and started the process of contesting it. My mum filed for separation from the estate posthumously, which I didn't even know was possible, but apparently when you find out your spouse had a secret child, you can do that. David hired his own lawyer, provided the DNA test results, the bank statements, the letters, all of it. The court ordered a new DNA test to confirm, and when it came back positive, David was written into the will by court order. Things went from bad to unhinged when we had to divide everything up. My mum got the house, the cars, most of the financial assets, but David was entitled to a portion of the estate, and that meant going through our dad's things, deciding what was sentimental and what was just stuff. It was surreal, standing in my childhood home with this man I just met, sorting through boxes of old photos and realizing half of them were moments I wasn't part of. David found a photo of himself and our dad at a park, and I found myself wondering where I was that day, if I'd been at home thinking my dad was at work. We're siblings now, legally, awkwardly. David comes to family dinners sometimes, mostly because my mum insists. She says it's not his fault, that he didn't ask to be kept a secret, and she's right. But it's still weird. My sister struggles with it more than I do. She feels betrayed, like our dad loved David enough to support him, but not enough to tell us he existed. I get it. I feel the same way sometimes. The worst part is realizing we never really knew our dad. The man we buried was a stranger who lived 2 lives, kept 2 families, and took the truth to his grave. And now we're left picking up the pieces, trying to figure out who he really was and why he thought this was the best way to handle it. Family secrets don't always come from parents. Sometimes they come from journals hidden for decades, containing crimes nobody suspected. After my mum passed away, I spent weeks going through her things. It's one of those tasks that feels both necessary and impossible, sorting through a lifetime of belongings while you're still processing the loss. Most of it was what you'd expect. Old photos, clothes she hadn't worn in years, kitchen items we'd eventually donate. But then I found a locked drawer in her desk. I'd never noticed it before, or maybe I had, and just never thought about it. The key was in a small envelope taped to the back of the drawer above it, like she'd hidden it but also wanted it to be found eventually. Inside was a leather journal, not a diary with daily entries, but something more sporadic. The first entry was dated 1987, years before I was born. I sat on the floor of her bedroom and started reading, expecting maybe some sentimental reflections or memories she wanted to preserve. Instead, what I found made my hands shake. On page 34, she wrote about witnessing a hit and run. She described it in detail: the date, the intersection, the sound of the impact, the way the car didn't even slow down. A pedestrian had been killed. She saw the whole thing, and she knew who was driving because the car belonged to her boss at the accounting firm where she worked. She'd recognized the license plate, recognized him through the window as he sped past. She wrote about how she'd frozen, how she'd driven home in shock, how she'd watched the news that night and seen the victim's family begging for anyone with information to come forward. But she never did. According to her journal, her boss had called her into his office the next day. He knew she'd been there. He told her that if she said anything to the police, he'd make sure she never worked in accounting again. He'd ruin her career, her reputation, everything. And she believed him. So she stayed silent. She wrote about the guilt, about how it ate at her for years. She kept newspaper clippings from the case, articles about the family still searching for answers even as the case went cold. She wrote about seeing the victim's mother on TV years later, still wondering what happened, and how she wanted to come forward but couldn't bring herself to do it. The entries went on for decades, always coming back to that one night, that one decision. I felt sick. This wasn't the mom I knew, or maybe it was, and I just hadn't known this part of her. I didn't know what to do with the information. Part of me wanted to just put the journal back, lock the drawer, pretend I'd never found it. But I couldn't. Someone had died and their family had spent decades without answers because my mom had been too scared to speak up. I contacted a lawyer to figure out what my options were, both legally and morally. The lawyer told me that the statute of limitations on a hit and run in our state was long expired. The driver, my mum's old boss, couldn't be prosecuted even if we had concrete evidence. He'd actually died a few years ago anyway, according to a quick internet search, but the lawyer said that didn't mean I couldn't reach out to the victim's family if I wanted to. It wouldn't bring legal justice, but it might bring closure. And here's where it gets absurd. I spent a week debating whether to do it. This was my mum's secret, her shame, something she'd carried alone for her entire adult life. Did I have the right to expose it now that she was gone? But then I kept thinking about the victim's family, about the mother who'd gone on TV begging for information, about how they'd lived for 35 years not knowing what happened or why. I reached out anonymously. I sent a letter explaining that I'd come across information about the case, that the driver was deceased, that there wouldn't be legal consequences, but I thought they deserved to know the truth. I included some of the details from my mum's journal, enough that they'd know it was credible. I didn't mention my mum's name or her role as a witness. I just said I'd recently learned what happened and felt they had a right to closure. They responded through a P.O. box I'd set up. The victim's sister wrote back saying that even after all these years, knowing what happened meant everything to them. They'd always wondered if it was an accident, if the driver had panicked, if there was some explanation. Just having confirmation helped them finally process it. She thanked me for coming forward when so many people would have stayed silent. That's when everything unraveled in my own family. I'd told my siblings what I'd found, thinking they'd understand why I felt compelled to reach out to the victim's family. I was wrong. They were furious. My brother said I'd tarnished Mum's memory, that I had no right to expose her mistakes after she was gone. My sister stopped speaking to me for months. They felt like I'd betrayed her, like I'd turned her into a villain in a story that should have stayed private. We had screaming arguments about it. They said she'd been scared, that she'd been young and pressured by someone in power, that she didn't deserve to be judged decades later for a decision she made under duress. And they weren't wrong. She had been scared. She had been pressured. But someone still died and a family still suffered, and her fear didn't erase that. I kept coming back to the same thought. If it had been my kid who'd been killed, if I'd spent 35 years wondering what happened, I'd want someone to tell me the truth, even if it came decades too late, even if the person responsible was already gone. The family divide is still there. My brother and I talk occasionally now, but it's strained. My sister and I have barely spoken. They see what I did as a betrayal of our mom's memory. I see it as giving a grieving family the closure they deserved. I don't think either of us is going to change our minds. I kept the journal. I read through it sometimes, trying to understand who my mom really was. Not the version I grew up with, the one who made me breakfast and helped with homework, and never seemed to carry the weight of something this heavy, but the version who made a terrible choice at 26 and spent the rest of her life unable to undo it. I don't hate her for it. I understand why she stayed silent, even if I don't agree with it. But I also don't regret reaching out to that family. Some secrets shouldn't stay buried, even if it means rewriting how you remember someone you loved, even if it costs you relationships with people who think you should have just let it go. The thing is, she wrote it all down. She kept those newspaper clippings. Some part of her wanted the truth to come out, even if she couldn't be the one to do it. Maybe that's why she left the key where I could find it. Or maybe I'm just telling myself that to feel better about the choice I made. Either way, it's done now. The family has their answers. My mum's secret isn't a secret anymore, and I have to live with being the person who decided that mattered more than keeping her memory intact. If you think uncovering your parents' secrets is devastating, imagine what happens when your sibling's bachelor party ends with flashing police lights and a fiancé demanding answers. My brother Jake had been planning his wedding for almost a year. He and his fiancée Emma were one of those couples that just made sense, the kind where you couldn't imagine them with anyone else. So when Jake asked me to help organize his bachelor party, I said yes without thinking twice. It was supposed to be simple. A weekend at a cabin upstate, some beer, some poker, maybe a hike if anyone felt ambitious. Low key, chill. Nothing that would end up as a story we'd regret telling. Jake's best man Tyler had other ideas. I should have seen it coming. Tyler was the kind of guy who thought every party needed to be legendary, who measured success by how much chaos he could create. But I figured Jake would keep him in check. I was wrong. We got to the cabin on a Friday afternoon, about 10 of us total. For the first few hours, everything was fine. We grilled burgers, played cards, told embarrassing stories about Jake from college. It felt exactly like what a bachelor party should be. Then Tyler disappeared for about 20 minutes. And when he came back, he had this smug look on his face like he'd just pulled off the greatest surprise of all time. Around 9 that night, there was a knock on the door. Tyler jumped up to answer it and 2 women walked in. Strippers. He'd hired them without telling anyone, not even Jake. My brother looked uncomfortable immediately, but Tyler was hyping it up, telling everyone to relax and have fun. Most of the guys went along with it, cheering and laughing. I hung back, already getting a bad feeling about where this was headed. The women started their routine, and honestly, it was awkward more than anything. But then one of them pulled out a small bag of white powder and started doing lines right there on the coffee table. Just casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. A few of the guys got quiet. I walked over to Jake and told him we needed to shut this down, that it was getting out of hand. He waved me off, said I was overreacting, that everyone was just having a good time. I went outside to get some air, trying to figure out if I should just leave or stick around to make sure things didn't get worse. About an hour later, I heard someone screaming inside. I ran back in, and one of the women was on the floor, unconscious, not breathing. The other woman was yelling for someone to call 911, saying she'd overdosed. Everything after that was a blur. Someone started CPR. I called the paramedics. Tyler was frantically trying to hide the drugs. Shoving bags into drawers and under couch cushions like that would somehow make them disappear. The paramedics arrived within 15 minutes, then the police right behind them. They stabilized the woman and rushed her to the hospital, and then the cops started searching the cabin. They found drugs everywhere, not just the cocaine the women had brought, but pills, more powder, stuff Tyler had apparently stashed around the place. Enough that it wasn't just personal use. It looked like intent to distribute. But that wasn't even the worst part. While we were all being questioned by the police, Jake's fiancée Emma showed up. She'd been tracking his location on her phone, something they'd set up for safety since the cabin was in the middle of nowhere. She'd seen the police activity and got worried, but she also saw something else. A neighbor had live-streamed the whole thing, the ambulance, the police cars, the chaos, and it had gone viral locally. People were sharing it, commenting on it, tagging the location. Emma saw the live stream, saw the comments speculating about what happened, and drove up immediately. She walked into the cabin while Jake was being questioned and the look on her face was something I'll never forget. Not just anger, but heartbreak. Betrayal. Jake tried to explain, said he didn't know Tyler was bringing drugs, that he didn't participate in any of it. But she'd seen enough. She'd seen the strippers, the drugs, the police, and she was done. And here's where it gets absurd. Tyler, in the middle of all this, tried to play it cool with the cops. He claimed the drugs weren't his, that the strippers must have brought everything. But the police found texts on his phone, messages where he'd arranged to buy the stuff days earlier, where he'd bragged to friends about how wild the party was going to be. They arrested him on the spot for possession with intent to distribute. Jake wasn't arrested, but he was detained overnight for questioning, since it was his party and he was technically the host. They let most of us go after taking statements, but Jake had to stay. Emma left without saying another word to him. I drove home alone at 3 in the morning, my phone buzzing non-stop with messages from people who'd seen the live stream, asking if Jake was okay, if it was true what they were hearing. The woman who overdosed survived, thank God, but the damage was done. Emma called off the wedding 2 days later. She sent back the ring with a note that just said she couldn't marry someone who let things spiral that far, who didn't have the judgment to shut it down before it became a criminal situation. Jake tried to reach out, tried to apologize, but she blocked him on everything. Tyler's serving 2 years now. He took a plea deal, admitted to the possession charges, and got sentenced. Some of the other guys who were there won't talk to Jake anymore, either because they're mad he didn't stop it, or because they don't want to be associated with the scandal. The whole thing blew up our friend group. Jake's in therapy now, working through everything. He got sober, cut off contact with anyone who was involved that night, and he's trying to rebuild his life from scratch. He tells me he regrets not listening when I said we needed to shut it down, that he was too worried about looking uptight or ruining the vibe. He thought he could control it, that nothing that bad would actually happen. The level of denial required to watch someone do drugs at your bachelor party and think it'll just work itself out is genuinely staggering. I still think about that night sometimes, how quickly things went from normal to catastrophic, how one bad decision by one person dragged everyone else down with it. Tyler brought the drugs, but Jake let it happen, and that choice cost him his fiancée, his reputation, and almost his freedom. Bachelor parties can spiral, but baby showers are supposed to be wholesome, until an invitation accidentally exposes a DNA test that changes everything. My sister Megan had been planning her baby shower for months. She's one of those people who loves organizing events, making everything Pinterest perfect, color coordinating every detail down to the napkins. She'd been using Canva to design the invitations, mood boards, games, all of it. The digital invites looked beautiful, professionally done, with little pastel elephants and her due date in fancy script at the bottom. She sent them out to about 30 people, family and close friends, with a link to RSVP and see the registry. I got mine on a Thursday afternoon and clicked through to admire her work. The invite was cute, and I was about to close the tab when I noticed something. The link didn't just go to the invitation, it went to a shared folder, and inside that folder were a bunch of other files, design drafts, guest lists, budget spreadsheets, the kind of stuff you'd expect. But there was also a PDF labeled paternity test results. My stomach dropped. I stared at that file name for a solid 10 seconds, trying to convince myself it was something else. Maybe a joke file or a mislabeled document, but deep down I knew it wasn't. I didn't click on it. I immediately texted Megan and told her the folder was public, that people could see all her files, and she needed to change the privacy settings right away. She texted back a bunch of question marks and said she'd look into it. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I'd caught it in time. I was wrong. Our cousin Jennifer, who's always been the type to dig into other people's business, had apparently opened the PDF within minutes of getting the invitation. And because she's also the type who can't keep anything to herself, she took screenshots and sent them to our family group chat with a message that just said, does anyone else see this? The test results showed that Megan's husband, the guy she'd been married to for 3 years, the guy everyone assumed was the father, was not biologically related to the baby. The group chat exploded. People were asking if it was real, if Jennifer had photoshopped it, if this was some kind of prank. My mum called me in a panic, asking what was going on. My brother sent a text saying this had to be a mistake, but the screenshots were clear. Official lab letterhead, both names listed, results showing 0% probability of paternity. There was no mistaking it. I tried calling Megan, but she didn't pick up. I texted her again, this time telling her what Jennifer had done, that the whole family knew. She responded an hour later with just, "I know." That was it. No explanation, no panic, just those two words. I found out later that by the time she saw my text, her husband had already found out. His brother, who was also in the family group chat, had forwarded him the screenshots with a message asking if he knew. Her husband confronted her immediately, and according to what Megan told me later, she broke down and admitted everything. But that wasn't even the worst part. The baby shower was 2 days later. Megan didn't cancel it. I don't know if she thought she could salvage things, or if she was just in denial, or if she genuinely didn't know what else to do. But the shower went ahead as planned. I showed up because I didn't know what else to do either. The venue was decorated, the cake was there. A few of her friends, who apparently hadn't been in the group chat, were chatting and laughing like nothing was wrong. But the tension was unbearable. Family members who did know were whispering, avoiding eye contact, pretending to be interested in the gift table. Then her husband showed up. I didn't think he would. I thought he'd be anywhere but there. But he walked in, looked around the room, and went straight to Megan. She was standing near the dessert table, holding a glass of sparkling cider, trying to smile through what was clearly the worst day of her life. He didn't yell, he didn't make a scene. He just asked in front of about 20 people, "Why didn't you tell me?" The room went silent. You could hear people breathing. Megan started crying and said she thought the baby was his. She admitted to a one-night stand 8 months earlier, said it was a mistake, that she'd been drunk and stupid, and that she genuinely believed her husband was the father until she took the test. She said she'd only done the test because she'd been paranoid, that she wanted to be sure, and when the results came back, she didn't know how to tell him. So she didn't. She just hoped it would never come up. He left, just turned around and walked out without another word. Half the guests followed him out of sheer awkwardness. The baby shower, the event Megan had spent months planning, fell apart in under 10 minutes. The few people who stayed tried to pretend everything was fine, but it was obvious nobody wanted to be there. I helped Megan pack up the gifts in silence, and we left early. Things went from bad to unhinged after that. Her husband filed for divorce within the week. He moved out of their apartment, blocked her on everything, and refused to speak to her except through his lawyer. The real father, the guy from the one-night stand, found out through mutual friends and initially wanted nothing to do with it. But then his family got involved, and suddenly he was talking about custody, about wanting to be part of the baby's life. Megan's lawyer said he had legal rights, that she couldn't just shut him out, and now she's dealing with custody arrangements for a baby that isn't even born yet. She's moving to another state. She said she can't stay here, not with everyone knowing, not with her ex-husband's family living 10 minutes away, not with the constant reminders of how badly she messed up. I feel bad for her, honestly. She made a terrible mistake, compounded it by not being honest, and then had the worst possible exposure of it all because she didn't know how to set a folder to private. But I also feel bad for her husband, who found out he wasn't the father through a screenshot in a group text from his brother. That's not how anyone should find out their marriage is based on a lie. Our family hasn't spoken to Jennifer since. My mum actually removed her from the group chat and told her she wasn't welcome at family events for the foreseeable future. Jennifer tried to defend herself, said she was just trying to make sure everyone knew the truth, but nobody wanted to hear it. Yeah, the information was going to come out eventually, but screenshotting someone's private medical document and blasting it to 30 people is a level of cruelty that's hard to forgive. Megan's due in 2 months. I'm going to visit her after she moves, help her set up the nursery, try to be supportive even though I don't really know what to say. The whole situation is just sad. A marriage is over, a baby is going to grow up in a broken home, and a family event that was supposed to be joyful turned into the most humiliating day of my sister's life, all because of a shared Canva folder and a cousin who couldn't mind her own business. Sometimes the most destructive secrets aren't revealed by accident. They're deliberately left behind, like a grandmother's will that tears a family apart. My grandmother died on a Tuesday morning in her sleep, peaceful, the way everyone hopes to go. The funeral was 2 days later, and the whole family showed up. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years, all dressed in black, saying the right things about how much they'd miss her. I watched them file past her casket, dabbing at their eyes with tissues, and I couldn't help thinking about how most of them hadn't visited her in months. Some of them hadn't called in over a year, but there they were, playing the part of the grieving family. After the service, we went back to her house to start sorting through her things. My mom and her siblings were already talking about selling the place, dividing up the furniture, figuring out what to do with her savings. Nobody had seen a will, so they assumed everything would be split evenly between her 4 children. Standard procedure. I stayed quiet, helping pack up the kitchen while they debated in the living room. That's when my cousin found the safe. It was in the back of my grandmother's closet, hidden behind a stack of old blankets. Small, metal, with a combination lock. Nobody knew the combination. My uncle wanted to call a locksmith, but I remembered my grandmother had once told me she kept important papers in a fireproof box and that the combination was my birthday. I tried it. The safe clicked open. Inside was a handwritten will, dated 3 months before her death. I pulled it out and started reading, my hands already shaking because I had a feeling this wasn't going to be what everyone expected. I was right. The will left everything to me. The house, the savings accounts, the investments, all of it. Her estate was worth roughly $1.2 million, and she'd left every penny to me. My parents got nothing. My aunts and uncles got nothing. My cousins got nothing. Just me. There was a note attached written in her shaky handwriting. It said I was the only one who visited when she was lonely. The only one who called just to talk, and not because I needed something. She wrote that everyone else only showed up when they wanted money or help, and she was tired of feeling like an ATM instead of a grandmother. She wanted her estate to go to someone who actually cared about her, not her bank account. I stood there staring at the will, and my stomach was in knots. I loved my grandma. I visited because I wanted to, because I liked spending time with her, hearing her stories, helping her with groceries or yard work. I never expected anything in return, and now I was holding a document that was about to blow my entire family apart. My mom asked what was in the safe. I handed her the will without saying anything. She read it, her face going pale, then passed it to my uncle. Within minutes, the room erupted. They were yelling, saying I must have manipulated her, that this couldn't be real, that I'd probably forged the whole thing. My aunt accused me of elder abuse, said I must have pressured my grandmother into writing me into the will and cutting everyone else out. One of my cousins actually said I was a selfish bitch who didn't deserve a dime. I tried to explain that I had no idea, that I'd never asked her for anything, but nobody wanted to hear it. They'd already decided I was the villain. My mom was crying, saying she couldn't believe I'd do this to the family. My uncle started talking about hiring a lawyer to contest the will. The whole thing devolved into this awful screaming match, and I just grabbed the will and left. I couldn't be in that house anymore. I took the will to a lawyer the next day. She reviewed it, confirmed it was legally valid, properly witnessed, and recently dated. My grandmother had been of sound mind when she wrote it, and there was no evidence of coercion or undue influence. The lawyer said my family could try to contest it, but they'd have a hard time winning unless they could prove she wasn't competent, or that I'd manipulated her somehow. Neither of those things were true. My family hired their own lawyer anyway. They filed a contest claiming my grandmother had been suffering from dementia and that I'd taken advantage of her diminished capacity, except she hadn't had dementia. Her doctor confirmed she'd been sharp until the day she died. They tried to argue I'd isolated her from the family, but phone records showed she'd stopped answering their calls because they only contacted her when they needed something. Every argument they made fell apart under scrutiny. Things went from bad to unhinged when my family started spreading rumors. They told extended relatives I'd stolen from my grandmother, that I'd forged documents, that I was a criminal who should be in jail. People I'd known my whole life started looking at me like I was a stranger. I got messages from distant cousins asking how I could do something so terrible. My own mother stopped speaking to me for 3 months. The will was validated 6 months later. The court ruled in my favor, and I inherited everything. My lawyer suggested I consider offering a portion to my family as a goodwill gesture, but then she reviewed the messages and accusations they'd sent and advised against it. They'd been so hostile, so aggressive, that any attempt at reconciliation would likely be seen as an admission of guilt or weakness. So I kept everything. Half my family doesn't speak to me now. My mum eventually came around, sort of, but it's strained. My aunts and uncles refuse to acknowledge me at family events. My cousins blocked me on social media. The ones who do talk to me make passive-aggressive comments about how nice it must be to have all that money. How lucky I am that grandma liked me best. I bought my grandmother's house. I couldn't stand the idea of it being sold to strangers, divided up and forgotten. I kept her furniture, her photos, her books. I turned her garden into a memorial, planting her favorite flowers, adding a bench where I sit sometimes and think about her. I donated a portion of the money to causes she cared about. I set up a scholarship in her name at the local community college. I tried to honor her memory in ways that mattered, but honestly, I'd trade all of it to have her back. I'd give up the house, the money, everything, just to have one more afternoon sitting on her porch drinking iced tea and listening to her talk about the old days. The money doesn't make me happy. It just made me realize how much my family cared about her estate and how little they cared about her. I won't apologize for being there when no one else was. I won't apologize for calling her every week, for visiting on weekends, for caring about her as a person and not just as a source of inheritance. She made her choice and she had her reasons. If my family can't accept that, that's their problem, not mine. From wills that divide families to confessions that destroy reputations, this last story is about an aunt whose letter burned down everything we thought we knew. My Aunt Carol was the kind of person everyone in our family looked up to. Successful lawyer, married to a judge, always dressed impeccably, involved in charity work, the whole package. She was the one we pointed to when we wanted to prove our family had made something of itself. When she died suddenly of a heart attack at 56, the grief was overwhelming. The funeral was massive, packed with colleagues, clients, politicians, people whose lives she'd supposedly touched. I remember standing there listening to the eulogies, thinking about how she'd always been larger than life, and how unfair it was that she was gone so soon. A week after the funeral, her lawyer contacted our family. He said Carol had left specific instructions about a letter that was to be opened and read only after her death. He asked us to come to his office, said it was important, and that we'd want to be sitting down when we heard what was inside. My mum, my uncle, Carol's husband, and I all showed up, confused but curious. The lawyer looked uncomfortable, which should have been my first clue that this wasn't going to be some sentimental goodbye message. He opened the envelope and started reading. At first it seemed normal. Carol thanked us for being her family, said she loved us, apologized for any pain her sudden death might cause. But then the tone shifted. She said she had a confession, something she'd carried for 20 years, something that had eaten at her every single day, but that she'd been too afraid to admit while she was alive. She confessed that 2 decades ago, she'd fabricated evidence to win a high-profile criminal case. An innocent man had gone to prison for 15 years because of her. She named him. She explained exactly what she'd done, how she'd manipulated documents, coached a witness to lie, suppressed exculpatory evidence that would have cleared him. She said the guilt had consumed her, that she'd thought about coming forward 1,000 times, but she'd been terrified of losing everything. Her career, her reputation, her marriage, all of it. And here's where it gets absurd. She didn't just confess to us, she left explicit instructions in the letter for her lawyer to release copies to the district attorney's office, the media, and the Innocence Project. She wanted the case reopened. She wanted the man exonerated. She said it was the only way she could think of to make it right, even if it destroyed everything she built. The lawyer finished reading and the room was dead silent. I looked at my mum and she was pale, like all the blood had drained from her face. Carol's husband just sat there, staring at nothing. My uncle kept saying, "This can't be real," over and over, but it was. The lawyer had already sent the letter to the DA that morning, per Carol's instructions. Within 24 hours, the story was everywhere. Local news picked it up first, then national outlets. The case Carol had mentioned was famous in legal circles, a conviction that had been considered a huge win for the prosecution at the time. The man, whose name I won't use but who'd spent 15 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, was suddenly front-page news again. Reporters started digging into Carol's career, looking for other cases that might have been compromised. The DA's office announced they were reopening the investigation immediately. Our family became infamous overnight. Reporters camped outside our homes, shoving microphones in our faces every time we left the house, asking if we knew, if we'd helped her cover it up, if there were other victims. My mum had to take a leave of absence from her job because clients didn't want to be associated with us. Carol's husband, the judge, resigned from the bench within a week. He said he couldn't stay in a position of authority while his wife's corruption was being investigated. The law firm where Carol had been a partner faced a class action lawsuit from former clients questioning whether their cases had been handled ethically. But that wasn't even the worst part. The man Carol had framed, the one who'd spent 15 years in prison, was exonerated within 3 months. The evidence she'd fabricated was reviewed, the witness she'd coached recanted, and the case fell apart. He was released, and the first thing he did was sue Carol's estate for $10 million. Wrongful imprisonment, emotional distress, lost wages, lost time with his family, everything. His lawyer argued that Carol had knowingly and maliciously destroyed his life, and the letter she left was a full admission of guilt. We tried to fight it at first. Carol's husband hired a team of lawyers to defend the estate, arguing that she was dead and couldn't defend herself, that the letter might not be admissible, that the statute of limitations had passed on some of the claims. But the evidence was overwhelming. Carol had documented everything in that letter, and her lawyer confirmed that she'd been of sound mind when she wrote it, that she'd revised it multiple times over the years, updating it as her guilt deepened. We settled out of court for $8 million. It wiped out most of her estate. The house, the savings, the retirement accounts, almost all of it went to the man she'd framed. Carol's legacy went from hero to villain in the span of a single letter. The charities she'd supported removed her name from plaques and donor lists. The Bar Association posthumously revoked her license. Articles were written analyzing her career, dissecting her cases, questioning how someone so accomplished could have been so corrupt. And our family name, which had always been associated with success and respectability, became synonymous with scandal and shame. Things went from bad to unhinged when other former defendants started coming forward, claiming their cases might have been tainted too. The Innocence Project opened investigations into 3 other convictions Carol had been involved in. So far, none of them have been overturned, but the cloud of suspicion is there. Every time someone mentions our family, that's what they think of. Not the charity work, not the achievements, just the fact that Carol sent an innocent man to prison and then confessed to it from beyond the grave. I still don't know what to think about her. Part of me understands that she was trying to do the right thing, that leaving that letter was her way of taking responsibility when she couldn't bring herself to do it while alive. But another part of me is furious. She could have come forward at any point in those 20 years. She could have saved that man a decade of his life, saved her family from this nightmare. But she chose her career and her reputation over the truth. And when she finally did confess, she wasn't there to face the consequences. We were. The man she framed gave one interview after his release. He said he didn't forgive her, that no amount of money could give him back the years he lost, the relationships that fell apart, the life he could have had. But he also said he was glad she'd finally told the truth, even if it came too late. He said knowing he was right all along, that he wasn't crazy for insisting he was innocent, meant something. I don't know if that makes it better or worse. Our family name hasn't recovered. My mum changed her last name. Carol's husband moved to another state and cut contact with most of us. My uncle refuses to talk about her, says she's dead to him in more ways than one. I'm left somewhere in the middle trying to reconcile the aunt I loved with the person who destroyed an innocent man's life and then let us deal with the fallout. Secrets have a way of surfacing when we least expect them. Sometimes the truth destroys everything, and sometimes it sets people free. Either way, it always finds a way out. Sweet dreams, everyone. And remember, secrets have a way of surfacing when we least expect them. Sometimes the truth destroys everything, and sometimes it sets people free. Either way, it always finds a way out. If you've made it this far into the chaos, thank you for being here. Drop a comment with the wildest family secret you've ever heard. I read them all. Until next time, sleep well and maybe check your cloud storage permissions just in case.